A top United Nations official said Tuesday the uprising in Syria has grown into a full-scale civil war. Herve Ladsous, the UN Under-Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, said, quote, "Clearly what is happening is that the government of Syria lost some large chunks of territory in several cities to the opposition and wants to retake control of these areas. This marks the first time a senior UN official has declared Syria's conflict a civil war." The International Committee of the Red Cross said the situation is worsening in several parts of the country simultaneously. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, 51 civilians as well as 12 soldiers were killed on Tuesday. Meanwhile, Turkey is reporting more than 2,000 Syrians have fled across the border in the last 48 hours. This comes as more reports emerge that both the Syrian military and opposition rebels are receiving heavy arms from outside supporters. On Tuesday, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton accused Russia of aiding the government of President Bashar al-Assad.
We have confronted the Russians about stopping their continued arms shipments to Syria. They have, from time to time, said that we shouldn't worry, everything they're shipping is unrelated to their actions internally. That's patently untrue. And we are concerned about the latest information we have that there are attack helicopters on the way from Russia to Syria, which will escalate the conflict quite dramatically.
Russia has acknowledged sending arms but claims the weapons are only for self-defense. Meanwhile, Turkey has been smuggling powerful anti-tank missiles and other arms to Syrian opposition fighters in the Free Syria Army. The missiles are being financed by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. According to the New York Times, the United States was consulted about the arming of the rebels, but did not take part directly in the weapons transfer.
To talk about the crisis in Syria, we're joined by two guests. Rafif Jouejati is a Syrian-American opposition activist and the English-language spokesperson for the Syrian Local Coordination Committee. She's joining us from Washington, D.C. And joining us by Democracy Now! Video stream is Patrick Seale, a leading writer in the Middle East. He's author of Assad, The Struggle for the Middle East, and most recently, The Struggle for Arab Independence, Riyad el-Sul, and the makers of the modern Middle East. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Let us begin with Rafif Jouejati. Are we seeing a civil war in Syria?
I don't know if I would characterize it as a civil war. It is really a case of a regime trying to repress a popular demand for freedom and democracy.
Patrick Seale, would you characterize it in the same way?
Well, I don't think it matters really what we call it. It's just an extremely dangerous situation. In my view, dangerous for everybody, dangerous for Syria, for Iran, its ally, dangerous for Lebanon, for Jordan, dangerous for the United States, dangerous for the Gulf states. So it's a very tricky moment, and I don't think, quite frankly, the United States is helping to resolve the situation. It's pursuing a high-risk strategy, and which we can talk about in a moment if you like.
Well, what is that high-risk strategy? Well,
look, there are two promising diplomatic initiatives in recent weeks in the region. One is led by Catherine Ashton, the European Union's foreign policy chief, and the other by Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, who was mandated by both the Arab League and the UN to try and promote a peace plan for Syria. Now, Catherine Ashton was pressing for a win-win deal between Iran and the so-called P5+1, that's to say the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany. They've had 2 meetings so far. The first one seemed very promising, but there's another meeting coming up on the 18th of June in Moscow, and that doesn't look good at all. Why? Because the United States has toughened its position. It doesn't seem to want a win-win deal whereby Iran would give up its 20% enriched uranium, but be allowed to keep low enriched uranium for power generation. Now, why has the United States adopted this position? It seems to be taking its cue from Israel. President Obama either thinks that Iran is a rival to American hegemony in the Gulf, or he thinks with the elections coming up in November that he has to curry favor with Jewish voters. I fear the latter.
Rafif Jouejati, can I just ask you to respond to that? How do you feel the U.S. has been dealing with the conflict in Syria, and what would you like the U.S. to do differently?
Well, let me start by saying that to introduce notions of Jewish voters and the Obama re-election bid, I think is to detract from the fact that there are more than 12,000 civilians shot dead by the Assad regime. I would say that the U.S. has been supportive in condemning the Assad violations of human rights, systematic violations. What I would like to see is for more pressure exerted on Russia to stop the flow of weapons, including those helicopters that are on their way, including things like the shipment of $100 million worth of weapons just a couple of weeks ago. I would like to see more pressure on Russia to stop the flow of arms. I'd like to see more pressure on the international community in general to deliver relief supplies, which are so desperately needed.
But there are reports today, Rafif Jouejati, that both Saudi Arabia and Qatar are arming the rebels in Syria.
So there have been reports and there were pledges of support from Qatar and Saudi Arabia. According to the FSA, those weapons are...
We may have just lost Rafif Jouejati for a moment. We're going to get her back. We're speaking with Rafif Jouejati, who's a member of the Syrian opposition. And we're also speaking with Patrick Seale, leading British writer on the Middle East, who wrote a book about Bashar al-Assad's father called Assad, The Struggle for the Middle East. Rafif, I think we have you back, if you could continue.
Yes, so I was saying that we also need the international community to step up its relief efforts. As you know, the Assad regime has prevented much-needed relief supplies from reaching residents who are under continuous shelling and bombardment.
And Rafif Jouejati, can I just ask you to clarify who it is, if there are funds or arms going to the Syrian opposition, who is the Syrian opposition, the Syrian National Council and other affiliated groups?
So we've had pledges of support from various nations, but in reality, that support is not reaching the Free Syrian Army, which is only one part of the opposition. Instead, there are light weapons being smuggled across borders. So to say that the Free Syrian Army is heavily armed would imply that they are smuggling attack helicopters or tanks from Lebanon, and that would just be ridiculous. In terms of who constitutes the Syrian opposition, you have the Syrian National Council, which is an umbrella organization that encompasses, I would say, the majority of opposition groups. And then you've got the armed portion of it, which is the Free Syrian Army, which is composed primarily of defected soldiers who refused orders to shoot unarmed civilians.
How many people have defected from the Syrian army to the Free Syrian Army?
It's difficult to give precise numbers because some of this is obviously quite secretive, but the estimates are ranging in the 40,000 area at this point, with defections every day. Just yesterday, there were 3 high-ranking officials who defected from the Syrian Air Force.
Patrick Seale, can you say a little about your sense of who constitutes the opposition and whether the opposition is sufficiently united?
Well, as we all know, the opposition is deeply divided. The strongest, best funded, best organized element in it are the Muslim Brothers. Now, they have a long-standing grievance against the Assad regime, father and son, going back over 30 years. Indeed, ever since the Ba'ath Party came to power in Syria in 1963, Ba'ath Party, which is a secular movement, and from that moment on, some elements of the Muslim Brothers went underground, started taking arms, and mounted a terrorist campaign against the Syrian regime in the late 70s, culminating in the seizure of Hama, which the state then retook with great loss of life. Now, after that, the Muslim Brothers were banned. Membership was punishable by death. So they have a great deal to want revenge from this regime. Now, in addition to the Muslim Brothers, which are the many, many strands of them in Syria and outside Syria, there are also large numbers now of armed Islamic extremists, jihadis, so-called Arab fighters, coming in from neighboring countries, but also from countries further afield. from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from Tunisia. Now, these people, a lot of them coming from Iraq, where they've been carrying out suicide operations, which they're replicating now in Syria, gross acts of terror. Now, this is the problem. The number 2 man in Al-Qaeda, Abu Yahya al-Libi, whom the Americans claimed to have killed the other day, has just issued a video accusing Bashar al-Assad. So does the United States want to be on the side of Al-Qaeda?
Let us bring Rafif Jouejati into this description Patrick Seale has of the opposition of which you are a part.
Yeah. So let me start by correcting Mr. Seale on just a couple of things. First of all, I would say that the majority of the Syrian population has a grudge against the Assad family, which took power in a military coup and has retained power for more than 42 years through violence and repression. So I would say it's not just Islamic fundamentalists who desire to see this regime toppled. It is the majority of the population. Second of all, on the ground, the network of activists, the LCC has one of the largest network of activists. It is a decidedly secular organization. The opposition, the SNC, the LCC, all of the different various groups that do fall under the SNC umbrella have condemned any al-Qaeda operations. Now, certainly, al-Qaeda is a rogue organization that thrives on chaos, and had Bashar al-Assad retained any stability in the country, we might not be seeing the kind of chaos that allows certain elements to slip through borders.
Rafif, did your father work for Hafez al-Assad?
My father served the Syrian government from independence from the French all the way until his death 9 years ago.
So he worked under Hafez al-Assad. What was his position on Bashar al-Assad's father?
My father believed in service to his nation and not particularly to a regime. He was never a member of the Ba'ath Party. He wanted to serve his country. He believed in a free and independent Syria.
Last month, the U.S. expelled the top Syrian diplomat in Washington following the massacre of over 100 people, Hula. State Department spokesperson Victoria Nuland spoke in late May, blaming Iran for the massacre.
This morning, we called in Syrian Chargé d'Affaires Zahir Jabour and informed him that he is no longer welcome in the United States and gave him 72 hours to depart. We took this action in response to the massacre in the village of Huala. Absolutely indefensible, vile, despicable massacre against innocent children, women, shot at point-blank range by regime thugs, the Shabiha, aided and abetted by the Iranians who were actually bragging about it over the weekend.
We'll go to this issue of Iran after break. That was Victoria Nuland, State Department spokesperson. We're speaking with Rafif Jouejati, an activist and member of the Syrian opposition. She's in Washington. Patrick Seale, leading British writer on the Middle East, is joining us from the south of France. Stay with us.